We all make more than 35,000 decisions a day. Most are small, but some can be life-changing.
When it comes to taking care of yourself, the most important choices can be hard to make. Like having a tough conversation instead of ignoring a buddy's call.
Or being there for support, not assuming things will just get better.
Or fighting through challenges rather than giving up.
And while we all face thousands of choices every day, there's one that can make all the difference. Today, make the decision to be there. For the veterans in your life, for your community, for yourself. Learn more at BeThereForVeterans.com.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis. I'm the host. Oscar Mike Radio is part of the Hubazoo Network. You can find out more on Hubazoo.com. And I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asack of Asack Real Estate, Mark Holmes, National Guard veteran of Reaper Detailing and Power Washing. Thank you very much for your support. I also want to thank my Oscar Mike Radio supporters, Semper Savage Salad Dressing, Bottom Gun Coffee, and Cason Shaving Company. Thank you very much. Go to OscarMikeRadio.com to learn more. And I'm excited to be remote. I've learned a whole lot in the last couple of minutes doing this remote. I learn something every time. And we are with my fellow Marine Corps veteran, Alan. He owns a photography studio, and we are at the Bridgewater VFW, the James A. Oliver Jr. Post 2125, doing this remote today. And I want to thank the Bridgewater VFW for allowing us to use the space. So without any further ado, it's not very often to say, Alan, thank me for my service.
You're welcome for your service.
And I want to thank you for your service. Alan is a Marine Corps veteran photographer and the host of the Thank Me for My Service podcast. And I just want to say welcome to Oscar Mike Radio.
And it's an honor to be here. I really appreciate it.
All right. You know, we've done a whole lot of learning here in the last couple of minutes. It's been great. But now that we're doing the show, I'm extremely excited to have you on. We connected through Masshole Marines. Big shout out.
Shout out to Masshole Marines.
Massholes forever, right?
Right.
And you're like, hey, I do this podcast. Come down, check out my studio. And I came down there. I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, he has a dope studio. If I can, I'm talking to my kids right now, but it's dope, right? It is absolutely awesome the way he has it set up. And we got to talking, and I'm like, you know, this is amazing. A lot of military podcasters think, well, there can only be one podcast right near me, but there's room for everybody. So I'm just excited to get to talk with you today, and thank you for being flexible, Semper Gumby, and help me get this setup dialed in.
Yeah, no problem. That's what I do too. So I totally get, having to kind of work around everything and make things happen. So.
Well, I appreciate it. So, give us a little background of your military story, because every story is different.
Yeah. So I grew up in Dennis, Massachusetts, on little Cape Cod.
On the Cape.
Yeah, I'm a Cape kid. So I grew up on the Cape in Dennis, and graduated from DY High School in 2000. I had already well before that decided that the Marine Corps was going to be what I was going to do. They got me with the commercial. I thought, climb mountains, slay dragons, fire. I'm in.
You're in.
I'm in. I'm doing it. So I signed up a long time before that, ready to rock and roll on that. So when I graduated in 2000, I pretty much left right after that off to Parris Island and did all that stuff. Ended up going into amphibious assault. Went off to amphibious assault school in California. And then after that, back to the East Coast, stationed at Lejeune. And then that was pretty much right before 9/11 happened. Pretty unique, Yeah,
what was that like? I mean, you're doing your Marine Corps job, and then the word comes down that this happens. Well, how'd the switch flip?
Well, I mean, for me, I was the new guy, in the fleet. You go, you leave, and you're like, I'm finally done getting messed with. They're gonna leave me alone now. I'm in, and then you get to the fleet, and it's like, it's not so much. But at that period of time, you know, you're a young guy, you're new, you know, and then something like that happens. The level of seriousness, you know, ticked up a bunch of notches. Not to say that things weren't serious before, as far as like the approach to training and that sort of thing. But I think after that happened, you know, it was always kind of in the back of your mind that, like, okay, we kind of know what's coming next. It doesn't really look like there's any other way for this to go. So we better really soak in everything a little extra.
Did you do a full, you know, 2 tours, 1 tour?
So I was in the initial invasion in 2003 into Iraq. At that particular time, at least within the fleet, we weren't really sure where we were going. You know, Afghanistan had happened earlier.
Right.
So it seemed to us that, you know, it was either going to go one of 2 directions. You were either going to go here, and then if you didn't go there, you know, obviously at that time we weren't aware that there was going to be Iraq. But then that kicked off, and it was kind of like everybody kind of split. Some of us went one way, some of us went the other way. So I did the initial invasion in 2003, and then my time ended after that, and I didn't go back for another deployment before I got out. So
Okay. You get out, and kind of, you know, what was your transition experience like after all that?
It wasn't good. You know, I think back then I don't think back then there were the same kind of networks.
The resources networks weren't there.
They've gotten a lot better now.
Yep.
But back then they're really basically non-existent. So you go from this period where, you know, you are a young guy, you kind of grow up in this environment, and then, you know, things kind of, you know, the defecation kind of hits the oscillation, and then you're in the middle of that, and then you have to kind of as a young guy that doesn't really know anything else, you're kind of kicked out into the real world, and you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, I've done so much good stuff. You know, I was very successful. I had reached this rank of E5, and, you know, in a short amount of time, you got everything's going good. I've got it all under control. Surely, I'm going to be successful when I get out of here. You know, I've got all these skills, right? So that wasn't necessarily the case. I could not get a job. I couldn't get anybody to even look at me to give me a job. I ended up moving down to Myrtle Beach. I ended up taking, the only job that I could get was washing towels at a resort. And I think, you know, and that's, I'm not going to say that, you know, everybody has those issues, but a lot of times it's very common. You feel like nobody cares, and then, you know, you start to not care anymore. And you start to, you know, not put as much effort in, thinking, like, what's the point? And then that's how the spiral starts to happen.
Right.
You know? So for me, that was my experience. And it, you know, I eventually had made some self-corrections. But yeah, you once you get stuck in that place, it's hard to get out of it.
So you're in the spiral, you're in the chasm, you're in the valley. You know, what kind of started getting you back to normal, if I can even use that word?
I be honest with you. First of all, moving down to Myrtle Beach, probably not the best idea. At that time, you know, I was fresh out. I was in this relationship with you know, this girl that I had met while I was still in, and I had moved in with her. That's strike 2. Strike 3, having my motorcycle down in Myrtle Beach, that's strike 3. And then, you know, you get stuck in all these different things, and you don't realize at the time that you're making all these moves for all the wrong reasons, right?
Right.
And for me, the drinking, the antisocial behavior, the overly aggressive kind of like approach to everything really started to take a toll on everything. And everything that I touched became everything that I touched, I turned to poison, So it was one day. It's honestly, there isn't really any dramatic story as to what made me change. It really, honestly, came to a head one day. I woke up and I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth, and I looked in the mirror and I said, if I don't get out of this place, I'm never gonna get out of this place. In other words, I don't know how much longer I'm gonna be able to keep doing this. So I made that decision. I made a call. I got a gigantic truck. My buddy helped me load it up, and I was gone 2 days later with everything I owned, back up here to Massachusetts.
You get up here. How did the photography business get going again? Was that part of this?
No. So
okay.
I mean, if you asked my buddies, when I tell them, I do I'm a photographer now. I do photography. They're like, right.
But he actually does.
I do, yeah.
And I'm just telling you, ladies, if you need some wedding work done,
yeah.
This guy is good. I've seen his work. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the photography had nothing to do.
Had nothing to do with it, and I didn't really even have any interest in anything like that. I think what kicked it off for me is actually years later. I had gone into policing for a while. I was working up in the Boston area. I did that for about 8 years. I started having some medical stuff going on. My father ended up dying of brain cancer, which we found out was linked to Agent Orange. And when that happened, a couple years out of retirement, when that happened, and I one day it was fine. 2 days later, he couldn't remember how to use his cell phone. And when something like that happens, it kind of is an eye-opening experience, and kind of like a warning. There's a lot of things you can control, but there's also a lot of things you can't control. So you need to, pay attention. And that's when the wheels started turning. I said, I need to kind of deal with some of these things and go get the help and with the VA. And I did. And that ended up leading me going back into college. Did you use your GI Bill? I didn't. I used Voc Rehab.
Oh, nice.
So I used Voc Rehab. I went back to college. I ended up getting associates. I'm actually finishing up my second degree, Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science over at Bridgewater State University. I'll finish up this semester. But the photography thing came later. I was looking at old pictures. Back in the day, we didn't have the digital photographs. You could just pop off a digital photo and boom, there it is on your cell phone. We didn't have that really either. So the only photos you have are the ones that you took the time to go down and get developed at wherever you went and got them developed at. So you get your paper pictures, and that's it. And if you didn't do that, you don't have pictures. That's how it worked, right? So for our younger viewers,
they have no idea.
No. So it was a hassle to get your foot. You had to go and drop the film off, then you had to go pick up the pictures, and then maybe they were good, maybe they were garbage. You don't know until you get them back, right? Whereas now I can see everything I'm doing in camera, wow, what's going on, So, but I was looking through old photos, and I had some photos, and there was this one Marine that we were all really close with who ended up dying. And I only had one photo. It was the only photo I had, and I said to myself, I really wish that I had taken the time, as much of a hassle as it was back then, to take more photos, and kind of, because now it's important to me. Back then I care less, you don't think about that stuff. But now, I'm in my 40s and I'm looking at these photos, and this is all I have, And as you get older, your memory starts to become less and less, and it's less vivid, and those pictures are important. And I said, and it was very random. I was up at a college on the North Shore, and they had a class. And I said, let me try this. Let me go check this out, because when I first saw photography, it was back in the late '90s. And we were going in the darkroom and developing the film. And I thought that was cool, but I was like,
Wasn't like the standard camera, the Canon AE1, you know?
I don't even remember
It was
anymore.
just an old
but
35 millimeter
so
workhorse.
Yeah, so back then that was my experience, and I actually enjoyed it. I thought, it's cool. It's a lot of work. I don't know if I really dig it that much. But then I said, well, let's see this digital, the old guy now, or the old guy. Seeing this
Isn't
digital.
that something? You're the old guy now?
That's crazy to me. We can talk about that a little bit more later. That's kind of how that podcast thing started. But so I decided I'm going to try this digital photography thing, right? So I signed up for this class, and I hit up the VA, and good on them. They bought me a, nothing crazy, just a kit camera, a Nikon kit camera. And it was the craziest thing. I had the camera, I picked up the camera, and I put it on manual, and I could just do it. It was one of those things where I just it all made sense. There was no I don't really know. I just felt like something that I could do. And it didn't take long for me to really figure it out. And then, we all have our vices, right? For me, it's my motorcycle. And when I
have a motorcycle. That's not a vice, Alan.
Well, I guess it depends. If you're obsessive about it, So
we'll talk. That's not a bad thing.
Well, no, it's not a bad thing at all, and I'm not
kidding,
implying that it is. I'm just saying that when you have something that you really enjoy, and that's like your thing, you need to have that thing.
Absolutely.
Most of us, and especially since I find when I do mine, everybody's got that one thing that they really need, and that's a good thing. But when it's 3 feet of snow on the ground, you're not riding anywhere.
I'm sad.
So the photography thing became like one of those things where I was like, but the flip side to that is me constantly trying to figure out, how did he do that? How did he take that shot? And spending staying up all night just to learn how that one photographer took that one shot. And my wife looking at me the next day and go, did you stay up all night because you were looking at a picture? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm not ashamed of it, But then it became a thing where well, now I want to try that shot. It looks tough. How did he shoot directly into the sun and still have the model there? Was he using flash? How did he do that? And me going out, doing the research, figuring out how they did it, and then going out and doing it and nailing it the first try and being like, okay, on to the next thing. And that's kind of how it started. Then before you know it, I've got a studio.
What's the name of your studio?
It's Alan Lacerda Photography.
Alan Lacerda?
Yeah, Alan Lacerda Photography, and it's in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. So, yeah, and that started the next thing. You get into social media. You start figuring out how that works. How do you do advertising? How do you do video? How do you do? So it's become this snowball effect for me where I'm constantly trying to learn something new.
Well, that kind of brings it, into what I picked up on when I went to your studio and we started talking is a lot of us veterans have to reinvent ourselves over the course of our life. We're students are working before we go in the military. We go in the military, do something. We get out. We do a couple things. We might do anywhere from 2 to 7 things before we launch on our thing. And it just seemed like that you had not bounced around, but really, worked to find your thing. And then it was this domino effect for you.
Right. Yeah, I find that to be absolutely true. For me, once I get my claws in something, and I feel comfortable in that one thing, then I look for the next thing, and I look for the next thing. So I knew that I always wanted to do something with the podcast, right? Once I got in the studio, I said, okay, well, this is how I can make that happen. So the first year I was in business, I ended up finding the studio, which is basically, it's on Spring Street in Bridgewater, which is...
So this, for when you say podcast, what germinated the idea that you said, I want to do a podcast?
Right.
Because that's a big
good
commitment.
Question, yeah. So I'm in school
with
with a bunch of 19-year-olds, right? And when you're 41 and you kind of have the background that I have, you look at life a little different. And the story goes, I was having a conversation one day with a young gentleman. It might have been 19, 20, and he was talking about, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how it came up, but 9/11, the subject of 9/11 came up. And I was explaining to him, what that experience was like, looking at it, through my lens, which at that time was pretty unique lens to be looking at it through. And we're having this conversation, and I'm explaining to him how things went down, and what was going on, and I could tell that he was with me in the conversation, but he wasn't with me in the conversation. Like, he understood what I was telling him, but it didn't
click.
It didn't click,
No
and
reference.
I didn't realize that at the time until I said, you remember. It was the whole vibe that day was kind of tough. And he said, I don't remember because I wasn't alive. And I was like, he has no context for anything that happened during that entire period other than what he sees as a rerun those horrible reruns every year that they play on Discovery Channel, or the endless, plane flying in the building. That's the only context he has for that whole period of time. He doesn't know anything else other than, maybe what some guy at a desk in New York's telling him. And I said, well, if he doesn't have any context for that event, how many other things do people not have any context for? And how could I create some of that context? Well, I said, well, why don't I just have guys and girls come in that dealt with those situations in different periods, and tell people what it was like. Not from some reporter at the desk in New York, but from the person that was actually there, who, this is an event in their life that they witnessed, that they went through, that they can explain and talk about their feelings and their experiences. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I want to do it. And that was my next thing. So I spent a year figuring out how I was going to do it. And so that is how I got into the idea of trying to do that, is that one conversation.
Well, sometimes that's all it takes, and you took that conversation, and then you took the year. And the reason I think that's significant, some people might gloss over that, but I can't, because a lot of times, like in my podcast, it took years to get to this point. I'm still making mistakes. I'm still learning. Mm-hmm. I'm still growing. You had a lot of things like you fast forwarded to X when I walked into your studio.
Yeah.
So tell me what the year was like, going through and figuring out how you wanted to look and sound and make your process work.
Well, first of all, I'm a complete psycho, is the first thing. So if you're asking me how it went from 0 to 1,000 in a short period of time, is because I'm absolutely nuts. I'm just obsessive about everything. So if I knew at that point that I wanted to do the podcast thing. I didn't know how I wanted to do it. I didn't really even know how I was going to approach it. So I knew if I wanted it to be decent. And I felt at the time that the subject matter that I was planning on covering, which I knew would be people's personal stories, I knew that needed to be kind of handled in a way that was respectful. And for me, if I'm going to display these stories, it has to be right. The quality has to be right. The audio has to be right. I felt like I owed these people that were going to come in and speak to me a certain amount of respect. And also, I'm just obsessive, so I didn't feel any need to rush it until I felt like it was ready. So the first year that I was in the studio, obviously I got in the studio right in the middle of the whole COVID thing. That's when I decided I was going to open the business. I said, why don't I make it as difficult for myself as I possibly can and give myself the largest chance to fail as a business? Let's do that. So that's what I did. I made it.
There's a couple other Marine Corps veterans and other veterans who started businesses during COVID. I'm like, guys, they're like, yeah, we know.
Yeah. I mean, the mentality for me was, if I can make it right now, then I don't have anything to worry about ever again. And if you're not willing to step up and take chances, then don't waste your own time. And certainly don't waste anybody else's time, because your product's not going to be good. You got to be willing to put yourself out there, and you got to be willing to do the work. And I felt like, we're at our worst right now. Let's see if I can be at my best. And that's what I tried to do. But I didn't take a paycheck out of the business for the first year. I took all that money and I saved it, because I knew that because I'm a psycho, this was going to be expensive. So I knew I was going to need the money in order to make this what I wanted it to be. I already had the studio space. I already had a background in lighting. I already had a background in photography and editing. So I said, I'm going to take all of that and I'm going to create the best possible setting that I can for these people to come in and share their stories. So that's what I did. I studied, much like I did the photography thing. Like I said, it's one thing, you're absolutely a maniac about this one thing, and then you move on to the next thing. And then that's exactly what happened with the podcast. I spent 6 months watching podcasts and with a notebook and saying, okay, Joe Rogan has a great podcast. What does he do that I like so much? I love the way that he does the camera switching. I like that. Make a note about that. Need to figure out how he does that, or how to do it in my price range, because his price range is not my price range. But right. How do I do that, duplicate that in my price range and not have the quality suffer? Write that down. Jocko. Do I like the way Jocko does his lighting? Sometimes. Should it be in color? Should it be black and white? I don't know. Need to figure that out. Write that down. So it just became this endless research project for what do I really like and what do I want and how do I make that happen. So once I had kind of a breakdown of how I wanted it to be done, then it came down to, do I want to spend, $400 per microphone? Do I want to spend, I already have multiple DSLR cameras in the studio, different ones for different things. One's better for sports, one's better for something, whatever. But to do that, you got to have 3 uniform setups if you're going to do what I'm trying to do with the 3 camera setup. $2,000 a piece, maybe?
You can very easily.
Yeah, $2,000 a piece for the cameras, with or without lenses, depending on what you're going for. Am I willing to spend that, and do I need to? And if I do this, is my podcast going to be portable? These are all things I'm trying to figure out. But eventually, I'm not going to give you the formula, by the way, but I'm not going to give you the secret sauce. But eventually, I figured it out in a way that worked for me, and that's important. Everybody's got to figure out what works for them, what they're comfortable with. But once I figured that out, I decided, well, I already have a studio. I've already got business internet. Why don't I hardwire everything? So I did that. Lights in the walls, on the remotes, on all this different stuff. I figured it all out, and then I built the production set inside the studio in the back room. And I try to, every episode I try to get a little bit better.
That's all you can do.
And you're right. I think most people jump into this. And honestly, I hear a lot of people say, I've always wanted to do that. And my answer is always well, then do it. You have this thing so you have this cool device in your pocket, right? And it does all these cool things.
Yeah, what device is
It's got
this,
a
Alan?
camera on it, and it records audio.
Get out.
It connects to the internet.
What?
So I always say, if you want to start doing something like that, you don't have to be a psycho like me. You can just pick up the camera on your phone and just talk. It's crazy. It's like
I am just speechless right now.
I know, it's a unique thing. I wish more people knew about it. But honestly, if you got something to say, you have all the tools in your pocket to do it. It just depends where you want to take it. There's nobody that's stopping you from speaking your truth. Whatever you want to say, you can easily say it. The only people that are stopping you from doing it are Google, which, we're constantly fighting with them. But
Amen. No, I just think it goes to show that every approach is different. My approach is very different from yours. It's better, worse, however you want to, do it. There is a secret sauce. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's called work.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's called constant learning. Like today, just in full disclosure, there's a couple things that I learned today that, I'm like, okay, I need to do differently if I'm going to do this setup. And I haven't done in-person shows like this in a while because of COVID. So
yeah.
I'm starting to get reps in again and remember, things I used to do 2 years ago.
Right.
But the thing is you had an idea and you took action. There's this big action component to a lot of what has to happen with a podcast. So you take your year and you go full in, you're full throttle, you fully go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Where does the name come in? Because thank me for my service. A lot of people don't get the joke or get the jib.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, so I think that there's probably this misconception that it's like we're being arrogant, or what people don't realize is there's a whole team of guys that are behind the scenes when we do these shows, and they're all vets. And when the name was decided, when you think about it like this, we have our little secret pages that we all are part of, Mass Hole Marines, for example,
Yep.
We're all part of these groups. And that's one of the things that always seems to happen is we always kind of rib on each other with that exact thing, thank me for my service, basically.
Thank me for my service.
Yeah, you going to thank me for my service? Or you should thank him for his service. It's always it's like an inside joke. So I said, all right, given the subject matter that we're potentially going to cover from time to time, whether it be, veteran suicide or just someone's personal story in general, I felt like it was important to kind of lighten it up a little bit. And again, there's some people that might take that the wrong way. But if you asked me if I cared, no, I don't care. The answer is no, I don't care. Watch episode 1. I explain the whole backstory of that. But it's a joke. Yeah, it's a joke.
It's a good joke.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny to vets, which is, that's what the show was originally intended to. But I also understand now that it's reaching an audience that aren't part of the veteran community, that just really want to hear people's stories, because they understand that, nowadays, you really don't know where your stuff is coming from.
No. So you take the full year.
Yep.
And you say, I'm going to start, take a full year, and then, what happens when you say, okay, I'm ready to launch, I'm going to launch? Take me down that.
So when I decided I was going to start launching the episodes, I realized there's a lot that needs to happen before you can just launch an episode. For me, the editing, because we're on. Well, the first thing I decided was I'm going to make sure that these are everywhere, on every possible platform I can get them on, because I know that there's going to be a potential for them to want to shut me down, which happens.
Well, it's happening now. I mean,
Yeah.
Facebook has pretty much come out and said that if you have a veteran tag in your content, it gets ranked lower.
Yeah. So
It's true.
So now I enjoy straddling the line on purpose. Any chance I get, I'm going to do that. Not to be disrespectful, but just to kind of say, there's nothing you're going to do to stop me. Even if you kick me off YouTube, I'm gonna I'll create another website and there's nothing you can do to make it go away. So you might as well just stop. But that's not realistic. We're controlled by the overlords, and they decide what's appropriate for people to consume as far as content goes. So that's been one of the battles that I fight. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Rumble, we're everywhere. And the reason for that is because I want everything spread out so that one person can't just decide what these people's stories getting out or not. So that's how that was my approach going into launching the thing. It was like, okay, I know what's happening with content. I know what's happening with Facebook. I know who owns it. I know they're. We don't say bad stuff on your podcast. We'll save it for mine. But you know what I'm getting at,
right? Well, defecation oscillation. That's what I'm going to remember.
You like that one, right?
Yeah.
That came from way back in the day.
Oh, that's good.
I had a master sergeant way back who said that to me one time, and I just thought, okay,
that's pretty good.
Yeah. Whenever I need to keep it clean, that's a good phrase to throw out there, right?
Absolutely.
But that's a battle we fight, and it's a lot of work behind the scenes. I think what people don't understand is that it's full time. You got to put a lot of time and effort into it. You feel like you sit down and do an hour episode or an hour and 20 minutes or 2 hours sometimes, depending on how things go. You then have to edit and prepare and upload, and then once you upload, you got to make sure that it's shared and advertised and all these different things. So and that's just our form of content. That's just us. But you have other veterans, like guys that I've met that do different types of things where they're cutting up all these different clips and splicing them together, and sometimes it takes them 2 weeks just to do a 3-4 minute long video. But it's a lot of work, and you got to be willing to put in the work for sure.
Well, I think that's where I kind of okay, I'm connecting with Alan because the work is there. You can see it, you can hear it, and I'm like, I really appreciate it. For me, it was just I had to start. So a lot of this was just, let's start now. But there's no wrong way to travel your path, right? Mm-mm. And you've done this now. You've been doing this for a year and a half?
The podcast? The podcast, I started the podcast January 1st. We dropped our first episode.
Of this year?
Yeah.
I thought you were longer for some reason.
No, and then it's just like, we're already on our way to being monetized.
No, I see that. And
it's definitely, people are like, well, you've been doing this a long time, right? And I'm like, not necessarily. It's just I did so much research and so much trying to figure out how to get to where I want to get to as fast as possible that it seems to be having an effect. And also I think the idea of what we're trying to do is starting to resonate with people, which is good because that's what it's intended to do. The podcasts, I always say that, the actual podcasts are not about me. They have absolutely nothing to do with me. I'm just kind of like the guide. Whoever comes on the show, this is their episode. This show is about them and their experiences and what they have going on. Maybe they're running a business. Maybe they're part of an organization. This is their moment to come on and be heard however they want to be heard. So that's how I approach everything. And it seems to be resonating. But I also don't tell them you want to maybe stay away from this, or this might get me in trouble. I don't do that because it's uncensored, it's unfiltered. It's not profane by any stretch, but there are profanities, but there's a difference, I think. I feel like I knew going into this, if I dictated to them what they could and couldn't say or how they could and couldn't act, then it's over already before it starts.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
a lot of collaborators and peers in our world are strictly focused on the guest or something that will get them the most analytics return. But you said something that I kind of agree with is, you want this to be about the guests you're talking about and their experience.
Right.
How important is that to you?
That's the whole thing. That's the whole idea. I understand that there's things that I could be doing that would make things easier for me. I didn't do this, and I think that the misconception a lot of times is that you're always doing this for some personal gain, to make money. And yeah, I mean that's a lot of times that's the case. With me, and this is what I tell the guys that work with me when we're doing these episodes, it's like, that stuff will come on its own. Right now, we're not there. We're on our way there, but the only way we're going to get there is if we focus on keeping it authentic to what we want it to be. If the quality is good, if the content is good, and we create this environment that people want to be a part of, we don't have to worry about any of that. The goal for the podcast obviously is to eventually monetize it, because then it allows us the opportunity to support some of these veteran causes, maybe have events, do all these things for the veteran community. That is a goal, maybe, I guess, but not something that I constantly think. I'm thinking about the person. I'm thinking about what is the best way to help this person either get some stuff off their chest, which I find to be a lot of times, it really depends how I approach it, whether or not that happens. And then when it does happen, it seems to have a very positive effect on whoever's in having the conversation, because they'll say, like, I don't think I've ever talked about that before, or I don't think I've ever been as open to discussing it before. So everything else comes kind of secondary to that. Like, I very much focused on creating a comfortable environment for those things to take place. And then I also try to, like, if they have a business that they're trying to run, if they have something they're associated with that they're passionate about, it then becomes about that. So if you look at the episodes that I post, even the gear that I wear on the show, that's a fellow veteran that I served with back in the early 2000s who has his own thing down in Florida. So all the clothing that I wear, the hats, the shirts, are all Raider World. He was a Marine Raider. So I support him because when I first started, he supported me. And he said, hey man, like, anything you need, if you need help. He had been doing it for a while. He does a different thing. But that's all it took for me to be like, I got you. I will never do an episode unless I'm wearing one of your pieces of gear, because you did that for me. So I try to do that for everybody else. I try to do something for them so that, it's just an all-around good way to approach it, I feel like, if you're asking.
Well, I'm asking because, you'll get into podcast groups on, social media and offline, peer groups. Mm-hmm. And it's just, hey, we're going to have a discussion about analytics. Yeah. And if you do this, you may get more followers. And, I'm not going to talk to this guest if they don't have no more than 2,000 or more followers. And I feel you lose something that way. I think every story has value. So my thing that I'm curious about as you're talking is how do you approach the kind of guests you want to have on your show?
That's a good question. Like, I'm not out for clout. I could care less if people personally like me or not. Could care less, really. And if you want to be successful, you better have that attitude, because if you care what everybody thinks about you, the internet's not a safe place for you.
It's not.
It's not. So my approach is, if you don't want to talk to me because I don't have enough subscribers, you're a tool anyways.
No problem.
Like, why would I want to associate with somebody like that? Like, you're a personality on the internet. That's all you are. And apparently that's all you want to be, because that's how you conduct yourself in everyday life. I don't need to be about that, because I've actually done things with my life, pretty cool things, pretty substantial things. I'm not hiding behind a camera trying to pump myself up to be somebody, because I don't care, you know? Like, there's nothing that I am going to do that's going to make me feel any different about myself. I know who I am. Maybe those people don't know who they are, and they think that being on YouTube is like a cool thing. Like, I could care less, and that's why I'm going to do better than you, because I don't care about that. Like, I know how analytics work, but that's not what runs my life, and it's not what runs my podcast.
Yeah, but it does so many other people's shows, and I have a hard time. I get it, but I also am like, well, tell me about the impact you've had on your life and someone else's life. That's what I'm interested in, and I think that's what we're getting here. And I'm sitting here as we kind of wind down with Alan Lacerda. He's a photographer, Marine Corps veteran, and has the Thank Me for My Service podcast.
That's correct, yes, sir.
Thank me for my service. And, it's just rare, in my line of work, that you get to talk to another veteran podcaster.
Right.
We're very small. And so, what's next for you? What do you think should be next for veterans podcasting?
I think that everybody has a different approach to how what it is they're trying to do. I take a little different approach than you do, but not really. I mean, ultimately, the goals are all the same, right? We're trying to bring attention to certain things, right? For me, it's more people's personal stories and allowing them to kind of unload, and also, giving them a platform to promote themselves or their business or whatever it is. That's what I do. In the future, I'd like to continue to do that, and I'm not going to deviate from that. And so if people are looking for like some kind of progression as far as like the way I conduct my interviews, maybe you should have them not swear anymore. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to change my vision for how it's going to go. However, we are going to be launching Thank Me Live.
Oh, nice.
Which is going to be a live show. So we have our full form interviews that we do, and on the podcast that are uploaded. But then I said, like, well, Google's already upset with me, so how can I make them more upset? And I said, I know. I can do a live show every week where I just discuss current event topics, and they'll really enjoy that. So that's what we're on to next. And the reason for that is because, once you box yourself into something, it's a veteran podcast with veterans that we have come on the show. What I've realized through doing this, though, is that not everybody is a veteran. We're a pretty small community.
Yep.
And there are other people within the community that are huge supporters of veterans' causes or have a lot of things to say, or maybe there's other organizations that are I find important. So that'll be the outlet where I can have people who aren't necessarily veterans come to the show and interact with me and the audience and kind of get involved in that world. I don't know if they're going to follow me where I take them. We're going to find out, though, soon. So in the future, that's what we're planning on doing. I don't want to change anything really from what I'm already doing, but maybe add another unique perspective to it.
Not really like the idea, because we're like, what, 1% of the American population, 1%, and so we're a minority of minorities. And you're right. Why exclude people who want to support us and who do support us? Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to I want to be inclusive, I guess is the right word. I want everybody to feel like they can watch what we're doing and be a part of it. It's for a very specific reason, but that doesn't mean it can't be learned from. And I realize now that I've started doing it, that because of messages that I've gotten from both veterans and non-veterans, the comments like, I haven't thought about that in 15 years. I haven't thought about that. And it was nice to remember those things. Comments like that, or, wow, I really didn't realize what that was like. I had no idea what that was like for those guys. Like, that was really eye-opening for me. I never realized that. When I get comments like that, I know I'm on the right track, because that's the whole intended outcome, is to have that kind of a reaction, to educate, through truth, basically.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to see you progress. We are very similar. We have very different approaches, obviously, but there's plenty of room at the table.
Oh yeah.
There's plenty of room at the table, and I definitely want to support what you're doing, and it resonates with me. So the most important part of the conversation is how can people find out about your professional career, the Alan Lacerda photography, and then how can people find your podcast?
So as far as the photography goes, my studio's in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, on Spring Street. I'm all over the place. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me pretty much everywhere you could look. If you type in Alan Lacerda photography, you'll find me. Google Maps, you'll find me. Google, everywhere. I take a lot of time trying to make sure that I'm visible, because if you're invisible, probably not going to do well. And it's the exact same thing with the podcast. I take that exact same approach. The podcast, you can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Rumble, Spotify. So if you type in "Thank Me for My Service,"
Thank Me for My Service.
Thank Me for My Service podcast, you will find it. And I hope that people watch it, and I hope they enjoy it, and I hope they hit that subscribe button, because I don't think people realize, to somebody who's on YouTube, how important that is for a content creator, because that's what tells Google, hey, this is important, and we need to make sure other people see this, because they do everything they can, like you said before, to kind of keep it under wraps, make it as difficult as possible for you to reach the masses. They control all of that. So
I'm telling you, we could do a whole segment just on that. But I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't want to beg, but I'm like, I get asked all the time, how can I help you out? I'm like, please subscribe. Don't just like my page, follow my page.
Yeah.
Well, why? Because those are the two things that the powers that be look at to compute, where I rate. So I definitely, I commiserate. I definitely understand.
It's important, for people to understand. And I can actually give an example. I did a video, or I did an episode with Connor Matthews.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw that one. Connor's a professional MMA fighter, but he's also a U.S. Air Force combat controller, right? Who had a unique experience. I was in the beginning stages. He was towards the end stages, Afghanistan. So we had different viewpoints of how things were going down. I did an episode with him, and we were talking about his time and my time. And he mentioned Obama, and he mentioned Trump, and he said that, like, it really depended on the president, the way that they were conducting their missions. It was a little more lax at this point. It tightened up a little bit at this point. He mentioned a president's name, and then when I went to go and advertise the episode, they shut me down and said that we were political campaigning. So that just gives you an example of what we're dealing with. We're at the point now where you can't even say the T word on the internet, and it's automatic shutdown. So it's important that people hit the subscribe button, because if you don't, then they have total control over everything and you have none. And that's just a battle you got to fight.
It is the battleground. It is the battleground. So I will have the links to Alan's Lacerda's photography business, Al's, podcast, the Thank Me for My Service podcast, all that in the Oscar Mike Radio show post. And, I've learned a whole lot from doing this show. It's always good to get another perspective. And, there's no reason why you can't support us both or one of us. I don't care like he doesn't care. So the thing is, the more people that can get the word out there, the better we're going to be, especially for how small we are.
Yeah, there's not a lot of us, and the ones that do kind of like what we're doing there have been at it. You've been at it a lot longer than I have.
A little longer, but I'm like I said, today I got some instruction. It was very good. So
that's good.
No, it's good in that way. So again, my name is Travis with the Oscar Mike Radio podcast. I'm with my colleague, peer, Marine Corps buddy, Alan Lacerda of Lacerda Photography, and the Thank Me for My Service podcast. And I just want to say I really appreciate you taking time on a Sunday to come out and talk with me.
Of course.
And again, a big shout out to Kevin Marshall and the Bridgewater VFW for making this space available to us. I want to come down here and do more shows because I learn and grow from having to do these things remote, and also it's just good for the VFW and how the VFW is trying to help out veterans. So, Alan, as we say at Oscar Mike Radio, mission in flight. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm Travis. This is Oscar Mike Radio, and we are out.
I want to thank you for joining me and watching Oscar Mike Radio. Now go to OscarMikeRadio.com and click Shop to check out all the cool merchandise from Authentically American. All proceeds go to veteran service organizations. We are Mission in Flight.